One kid killing the parents is a bad seed. Two kids killing the parents is a bad family.
Now, was this basement that was set up like some sort of a recreation room, or was it an extra bedroom? What, we're talking about the basement.
It was a recreation room where there would be a couch and chairs.
And how would you and your dad sit?
And the ping pong table. He would sit in the higher chair, and I would sit on the couch usually.
How close would you sit?
I would sit kind of hunched over, and my knees would be in between his knees, and he would be hunched over too, and our heads would be touching, and we would talk that way.
And what would he talk about?
Either we went over what I was going to do the next day if I had a match or practice, or there would be something that he was disturbed about, that he needed to. I would repeat phrases, and we'd basically go over the philosophies that were to correct whatever he didn't like that happened. Like,
give me an example.
Trip from Vegas to tomorrow.
We're talking about when he's 6 years old. Or if you have an example that's later, just tell us how old.
And I believe I was 7 or 8. I'm not sure. And at one point I had a conversation with Jerry and his dad, and they were Jerry's dad pretty much always came to the games too. And he would take Jerry aside after the coach finished talking to everybody, and he would sort of laugh and talk with Jerry. And sometimes I wander over in that direction, and my dad would usually call me back, say, "I want to talk to you," and we talked. One time Jerry's father came over and he grabbed me and said he wanted to talk to me about something. He wanted Jerry and I to get together and practice outside the team and do something. So he was talking to me about it, and I talked to him about it, and then the game resumed. And in the basement, my dad brought it up. He said, "You were over talking to Jerry and his dad, and what did I tell you about having friends?" I said, he just wanted to talk to me about practicing after Dad. I think it's a good idea. He said, "No. What'd I tell you about having friends?" And then he'd say, "Let's go over it." And that's when we put our heads together. And that's when I would repeat to him.
What would you repeat?
Phrases from his books. And that time I repeated a phrase, or I would just sit there and he would say, tell me what I told you about friends. And I would say, I have to constantly struggle because there are forces that tear me down, and sometimes they be disguised in the form of a smile or the hand of a friend.
Was that a quote from something?
It was a quote from the book. And he would repeat it, and I would repeat it, and he would repeat it, and then I would repeat it. And he would say, "Good."
How many times would you repeat it back and forth like that?
A couple times.
And in these talks, when your heads were together like that, if you said something that was a mistake, what would happen?
He would bump my head.
Hard?
Not too hard, just enough. This was very trance-like. I usually had my eyes closed, and his forehead was on my head, and we would just repeat things in this voice. Sometimes his voice would get harder if he was trying to emphasize, or if he didn't like what I was saying, he would just bump my head like that, and I'd try to go back and do it again. And we would do that for a long time.
What's a long time?
Well, in Muncie, it would be like over an hour, I would say at least, because he would take me through the whole match the next day.
How would he take you through the match? Just give me a short example of how that would start out.
He'd say, what I tell you we were going to work on in tomorrow's match. This is very important. I said, just go through it with me. I'd say, we're going to work on serve volleying. And he would say, okay, what are you going to do? I'd say, I'm going to come into net, and then what? And then I'm going to close off the net, and then what? And then I'm going to anticipate where he's going to hit the ball, and then what? And then on the next point, I'm going to not come into net, right? And then I'm going to take the short ball on the rise instead and come in. He said, okay. And then what? I said, in the next point, I'm going to serve volley. And why are we doing this? Just throw the kid off. I said, okay. He said, tell me again. I'd say, I'm going to serve volley. I'm going to close the net. And then what? And we'd go through the whole thing. And he'd say, good.
How many times would you go through it?
On the matches, he would just do it twice, depending on what it was, or sometimes a couple times. And we would go through my whole strategy, and depending on what strategy I was using. And he would want to know how I'm going to throw my opponent off sometimes.
Let me take you back to going through the match. How long would it take you to go through the match, point by point?
A good part of the conversation, maybe like 40 minutes.
Okay. Were there times that he would also talk to you about philosophy?
Yes.
And did he have a particular book that he liked to teach you about?
Yes.
And what was that book?
That was The Greatest Salesman in the World.
And did he have you memorize substantial portions of the book?
Certain passages I memorized. And
Was this sort
other
of
passages were blacked out.
So the things he didn't agree with, he blacked out?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Why did he black out certain parts of the book?
Name objection.
Sustained.
Did he tell you why he blacked out certain portions of the book?
Yes, he told me that they weren't relevant. That this was a great author, and he had written a book that was a special book and for everybody, but that only certain passages pertained to me and my ancestors, and basically just certain passages. So those are the ones I memorized.
Do you remember any of them today?
Not too many of them. I remember most of the titles of the passages. I remember some of the passages.
Was there one in particular that was important to him about sheep?
There were two that were important. One was, I will master my emotions. I will be the master of my emotions. Was very important. And I knew that one.
Can you do
The
it?
first part of it by heart. Yeah, it's my, if I feel depressed, I will be master of my emotions. Today I will be master of my emotions. If I feel depressed, I will sing. If I feel sad, I will laugh. If I feel ill, I will double my labor. If I feel fear, I will plunge ahead. If I feel inferior, I will wear new garments. If I feel poverty, I will think of wealth to come. If I feel insignificant, I will remember my goals. I will be master of my emotions. And this is the same part of the book that the paragraph about friends is in.
Why was mastering your emotions important?
it was really crucial to Dad, and a great sign of weakness to display emotion, happy or sad, as there's another passage I don't remember as well about being too happy, too confident, too pleased with yourself, and to remember your failures and things of that sort. So neither one. Somebody just unemotional that you couldn't read.
What was the advantage to that? Did he explain to you?
Yeah, that you couldn't be read. In the sports context, that's all that would be, not to give away what you're feeling, especially with regards to me, who seem to have a problem with nerves, fear, inability to. Another line I forgot is, if I feel uncertain, I will raise my voice, and that's a problem I had, speech problems, things of that sort. They were very important for me. If I could master these things, I could reach my goals.
And were there also passages in there that talked about people being better than other people, the people who were going to succeed versus the people who were going to fail? The sheep and...
That was also pertaining to friends. That's the passage that we recited most often because it had to do with my ancestors. And that went that I was not born into this world in defeat, nor does failure course within my veins. And then it would go, I am not a sheep waiting to be prodded by my shepherd. I am a lion, and I refuse to walk and to talk and to sleep with the sheep. And I will hear not those who weep and complain, for their disease is contagious, and let them join the sheep. And we would say that at the end of most of our talks in Muncie, and then we sort of didn't say it as much later on. But that was the theme, that other kids weren't trained in the way I was. They didn't come from the same bloodline, and they had this disease of mediocrity, and it was contagious, and to stay away from, and that it was very tempting, and I was a weak person, and I seemed to be tempted for some reason to hang out with other kids, and I needed to remind myself, and so we worked on it.
When your dad talked about the superiority, was this from both the Menendez and the Anderson side, that is both your father and your mother's side of the family, or was this just...
When my dad talked about it?
Yes.
No, he totally disregarded my mom's side of the family.
What was wrong with your mom's side of the family?
There wasn't anything wrong with it. It just wasn't what he wanted me to have in my head. He just didn't think that any of them had done anything of any significance. And, my name was Joseph, and that I should pretty much disregard whatever my mother tells me about her side of the family, because it just confuses things. And he wanted to keep things very simple. So I knew basically my dad's history, and only bits and pieces of my mother when she would be telling me about her family.
In these talks that you had, would your dad talk to you about setting goals and meeting those goals?
Yes.
What kinds of things would he say?
He would. My life was structured with little goals, and he would say that we need to set short-term goals, and some of these were like to fix the flaws that I seem to have with walking.
What kind of flaws did you have with regard to walking?
Takes from Vegas to 10.
Rephrase the question.
You said that he talked about flaws with walking. Did you have a problem with the way you walked? At
Yes.
some point in time?
Yes.
When?
I still do, I think.
What was wrong with the way you walked?
Just with the feet outward.
And besides talking to you about it as a goal, as a flaw to be corrected, how else did he deal with this flaw of yours?
Made fun of all our, anything like that he made fun of in our family. The walking, he would walk behind me and make quacking noises and say I walk like a duck, and get Eric to make quacking noises.
Would this be done on a public street
Yes?
with people around?
Yes.
Did that embarrass you?
Yes.
What other flaws did he set as goals to be corrected?
Speech.
What was wrong with your speech?
I didn't enunciate properly. That's what he said countless times. And I also sometimes stuttered because I just couldn't respond because I'd be so tense.
And what would he say when you stuttered? How would he handle that?
To make fun of it.
What would he say?
He'd just stutter back. And sometimes he would send me in our room and say, come back when I can talk. Sometimes he would just stutter. Sometimes he would just wait. And I would just keep trying, keep trying to get the words out. And he knew what I wanted to say. And he just let me go on.
And how old were you at these times when he was making fun of your stuttering?
I mean, the earliest I can remember, and maybe like pretty much mostly in Muncie and sometimes in Pennington if I got really nervous. I didn't really have a stuttering problem like my brother did more. I just, in some talks with my dad, I just was like crumbling. I just couldn't get the words out. Couldn't form the sentences.
What did you do to try and avoid stuttering? Or to try and avoid him humiliating you? Was there anything you could do about it?
Judgment roll.
Overall,
No, I really didn't talk much around my dad, only if I was asked. And I couldn't avoid it if I was asked.
What other flaws were set as goals to be corrected?
The talking to other kids was a big problem, continual problem. And for sure, the emotion. With me, it was mostly a tendency to cry or look sad.
And what would he tell you about that?
That I have to master my emotions. And he really was, it offended, I don't know if it offended him, but he had a strong reaction to tears, except my mother's.
Did you have any other flaws he wanted to correct?
In that period?
Do you have any problem with bedwetting?
Yes.
Until how old?
14.
And what would he do with regard to your wetting the bed?
Dr. Vegas to plan.
When you were young, what would he do? When you were in the Muncie house?
Did lots of things. Just made fun of me.
What would he say?
Say you're a sissy like your brother. And he'd just be totally disgusted. Didn't want to talk to me. Sometimes we'd skip practices if my mom had said that I wet my bed, and he didn't want anything to do with me. Sometimes it would just upset him so much, he would explode. And, I would get beaten for it.
What about when you were older, when you were 12 or 13 and it was still happening?
I remember him. My mother was mostly the one that would explode about the bedwetting thing, or punish me about the bedwetting in all kinds of different ways.
How would she punish you?
Sometimes she would rub my face in the sheets. She'd refuse to change the sheets. I'd sleep on the floor. She'd abuse my stuffed animals. I remember one time she just threw them all out the window, and I came home from school and they were all on the grassy area in front of the house, wet from the mildew, and one of the dogs had eaten up one of them. And and sometimes I would just be banished from the house, like I was in Muncie. I would just stay outside. And then she would always tell my dad.
Were you ever taken to a doctor?
No.
You checked in Vegas at the time.
The question was, ever in relation to anything at all?
No, were you ever taken to the doctor in connection to your bedwetting problem?
No.
How did it make you feel when your parents talked to you about what they thought about you wetting your bed?
I was very embarrassed, and I believed that it was a big flaw. And I was trying desperately to not do it. And I just had problems. And it would just go in periods. And there's like nothing I could do. And then...
Would he set other goals for you besides correcting these flaws?
Sports goals, for sure. Goals with academics.
What happened when you didn't reach your goals?
Well, I usually reached most of the smaller goals. And then we had goals that were like the next level and the next level. And, I don't remember any serious conversation about not reaching some big goal. I remember lots and lots of him being furious or upset about the steps involved in getting to the goals. And that I was sort of just bound to failure and not going to be like him. And, I knew that.
Did you think you were ever going to be as good as he was?
No.
Did you think you were ever going to be good enough to please him?
No, I didn't.
Was it important to you to please him?
Yes.
Why?
My dad loved me and showed it when I made him happy, when I pleased him, when I won, or did what he wanted, or did it right, or did better than he wanted. So I spent my days doing that. And when I didn't do that, it was obvious that I was going to end up like Erik, just who cares?